So picture this.
Oh.
You're having one of those just completely overwhelming days.
We've all been there.
Right. You're staring at a screen. Your brain feels like it is running on dial-up internet. The afternoon slump is hitting hard. And you turn to anyone in the room, and jokingly demand, I need a coffee stat.
Yeah. Or, it's later in the day, the hunger pangs are getting aggressive, and you declare, I need a Snickers bar stat.
Exactly. It's this universally understood, slightly dramatic shorthand for, I am completely out of patience and I need this thing right this second.
And it's funny because that one little word carries, an immense amount of weight. Just 4 letters, and suddenly the stakes in a completely mundane office or living room feel incredibly high.
Even if the urgent crisis is just a candy bar.
Exactly. Even for a candy bar.
The drama is just baked right into the word, and that is our mission for this deep dive. We are taking a massive stack of sources to unpack the true origins of the word stat.
Yeah, it's a fascinating journey.
We are going to dispel some of the persistent medical drama myths we have all absorbed from television and explore how a 19th century linguistic tool somehow continues to organize the literal minute-by-minute pace of modern medicine today.
Tracing a word that has become like a casual pop culture punchline back to its highly technical roots really reveals a lot about how we try to manufacture urgency in our own times.
We really do manufacture it. Think about how casually we use stat and ASP in our daily routines. We treat them as completely interchangeable.
Oh, all the time.
You get an email from a boss and it might say, need this quarterly report ASAP, or need this report stat. And the physiological reaction, that immediate drop in your stomach, is identical.
Completely identical, yeah.
But looking through the linguistic research in our sources, I realized something fundamental. Are these two terms even structurally the same thing? Because I always just assumed they were playing by the exact same grammatical rules.
Well, structurally, they are entirely different beasts.
Wait, really?
Yeah. They convey the same modern sense of panic to the person reading the email, but their anatomy could not be more divergent. ASAP is a true acronym. It's a modern creation of convenience, formed by just mashing together the first letters of the entirely English phrase as soon as possible.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if ASAP is an acronym standing for 4 separate words, what is happening with stat?
That's the big question.
Right, because people constantly write it in all caps, S-T-A-T, in emails, in chat messages, even on official documents. I see it capitalized all the time, which led me to assume it was also an acronym representing some complex medical phrase.
Right, but the capitalization is actually a massive red herring.
It is?
Yeah, stat is not an acronym at all. It does not stand for 4 different words. It is simply an abbreviation of the single Latin word, sedem, which translates to immediately.
Wow, so writing it in all caps is essentially just the linguistic equivalent of shouting in text form to artificially create panic.
Basically, yeah.
We are just adopting the visual formatting of ASAP to make the letters look more aggressive on the screen.
Exactly. We project that acronym formatting onto it because our modern brains naturally associate capitalization with urgency.
Yeah.
But statum is just a standard lowercase abbreviation. And it actually entered the English medical lexicon way back in the early 19th century.
See, I have a hard time wrapping my head around this.
Why is that?
Because if you are a doctor in an emergency room or, a surgeon in the 19th century trying to keep someone alive, seconds matter.
Right.
Why would you filter your thoughts through a dead language that nobody speaks conversationally? Wouldn't it be vastly more efficient and safer to just use the native everyday language of whatever hospital you happen to be standing in? Using Latin just feels incredibly pretentious for a life or death situation.
It definitely seems counterintuitive at first, but you have to look at what was happening in the medical field at the time. The 1800s saw this massive explosion in medical research.
Oh.
Physicians were finally sharing practices, publishing findings, and communicating across borders at a scale that had just never been possible before.
Ah, gotcha.
And there's a great 2018 article in the Journal of Medical Case Reports that highlights this. It explains that Latin acted as a necessary neutral ground for professionals from wildly different countries.
Oh, I see. So a doctor in London needed to read a paper written by a doctor in Rome, and a doctor in Paris needed to understand a procedure developed in Berlin.
Precisely. And relying on a living language for that kind of communication is incredibly dangerous in medicine.
Because things get lost in translation.
Because living languages are messy. They evolve constantly, slang develops, and regional dialects change the meaning of words.
Right.
A word that means fast in one dialect might imply like carelessly quick in another.
Right.
But Latin is static It does not evolve.
That makes total sense.
So a medical professional can write a prescription or a procedural note using a Latin abbreviation, and a professional halfway across the globe will understand the precise instruction without any risk of cultural misinterpretation.
It is essentially the original open source code for global doctors.
I love that analogy.
It's just this universal programming language that prevents translation errors from literally killing the patient.
The programming language analogy is very fitting, actually, because the Journal of Medical Case Reports article points out that Latin, along with Latinized Greek, functioned as highly productive tools for coining entirely new terms. They are modular languages.
Meaning you can snap the pieces together.
Precisely. They use standardized prefixes, roots, and suffixes that have unchangeable meanings.
Right.
Take a term like tachycardia. You take the Greek root tachy, meaning swift or rapid, and snap it onto cardia, meaning heart. Any doctor on earth, regardless of their native tongue, knows instantly that the patient has an abnormally fast heart rate. It's a highly functional, globally recognized system for categorization.
And Statum was simply one of these modular functional bricks that physicians started utilizing to denote that a drug or a procedure needed to happen immediately, bypassing any other language barriers.
It was a very specific brick. And that brings us to how this 19th century abbreviation practically dictates the physical reality of a modern hospital floor today.
Okay.
Because in the medical world, stat is not just a casual synonym for hurry up. It is a formal, highly specific gear within a larger machine of medical timekeeping.
So if stat is the top tier of urgency, what are the baseline gears it is overriding? Because looking at the hospital workflow in our sources, it seems like a physician's day is categorized into a very rigid hierarchy.
Oh, it's a strict three-tier classification system for medication orders. And to understand how stat functions, you first have to understand the foundational level, which a 2016 article in Pharmacy Practice identifies as scheduled orders.
Scheduled orders. Okay, this sounds like the baseline maintenance of a patient.
Exactly.
The example the article provides is antibiotics, I think.
Antibiotics are the perfect example. Scheduled orders are designed to provide a continuous, steady effect over a predetermined period of time.
Right.
If a patient is fighting an infection, a physician might write a scheduled order for antibiotics to be administered every 8 hours. The nursing staff knows that at 8:00 a.m., 4 p.m., and midnight, that drug is delivered. The goal is just to maintain a steady concentration of the medication in the patient's bloodstream.
So it happens routinely regardless of how the patient is feeling in that specific moment.
Yes, the schedule dictates the action. But obviously, patient care isn't entirely predictable. Someone might be resting comfortably at 2:00 p.m. and in agonizing pain by 4:00 p.m.
And that brings us to the second tier.
Right, that brings us to PRN orders.
And I noticed our Latin neutral ground makes another appearance here. PRN stands for pro renata,
It sure does.
which, according to the literal translation in the sources, means for the affair born, which is incredibly poetic, but it feels a little abstract for a clinical setting.
Yeah, a little bit.
How does for the affair born translate to a nurse's actual workflow?
Well, in modern medical practice, pro re nata translates functionally to as needed.
Okay.
These are conditional orders. They are written in anticipation of specific signs or symptoms that might arise, but they are only executed if the symptom actually appears.
So instead of maintaining a steady state in the bloodstream, you are reacting to a flare-up.
Exactly. The Pharmacy Practice article uses analgesics for pain and antipyretics for fever as primary examples. A doctor might write a PRN order for a fever-reducing medication. The nurse checks the patient's vitals. If the patient's temperature spikes, the nurse has the pre-authorization to administer the drug.
But if they're fine, it stays put.
Right. If the patient's temperature remains normal, the medication just stays in the pharmacy.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because when you look at these tiers, the continuous schedule versus the conditional reaction, it feels incredibly similar to the workflow in a massive commercial kitchen.
Oh, I like where you're going with this.
Think about it. Scheduled orders are like your slow cookers or your warming stations. You turn them on in the morning, they run all day on a set schedule, providing a continuous baseline effect. The staff doesn't have to panic about them, they just do their job in the background.
Yeah, the baseline operations of the ward.
And the PRN orders, the as-needed medications are like keeping salt and pepper on the prep tables. You don't just mechanically dump salt onto every dish on a continuous schedule.
No, that would be terrible.
You taste the food, you identify a specific symptom like this sauce needs more salt, and you add it pro e nata, strictly as needed.
And keeping that visual going, if you have 30 different pots and pans simmering in a busy hospital ward, a triage system like this removes the cognitive overload for the staff. The slow cooker is handling itself, the salt is waiting for a symptom, which leaves the medical team free to deal with the absolute highest priority.
Which brings us to stat. If the slow cooker is the scheduled order and the salt shaker is PRN, then the stat order is the equivalent of frantically turning off a boiling pot before it overflows and ruins the stove.
What's fascinating here is how this three-part system cuts through the chaos. A hospital environment is inherently chaotic, dealing with dozens of complex human bodies simultaneously.
Definitely.
By categorizing interventions into scheduled, PRN, and stat, it creates an undeniable objective priority list. The nurse doesn't have to guess whether the patient's routine antibiotic is more important than another patient's sudden severe pain.
Because the Latin categorization dictates the triage.
Exactly.
But if this system is so rigid and structured, how does that translate to the physical reality of the hospital? Because the sources point out that stat orders aren't just for pushing medications, they apply to massive logistical events like medical tests and procedures.
They absolutely do. A healthcare provider can put in a stat order for blood work, an X-ray, or MRI.
If a doctor orders a stat MRI, that requires a massive physical pivot for the hospital. You have a massive machine, an entire radiology department running on its own complex schedule of outpatient and inpatient appointments, and suddenly this four-letter Latin abbreviation overrides the entire queue.
The logistical cascade is intense. The system has to immediately adapt. The patient currently being prepped for a routine MRI might be delayed. Technicians have to reorganize their workflow. Porters are dispatched to move the stat patient immediately.
Wow.
It completely disrupts the scheduled equilibrium of the hospital, which is why a stat order is reserved only for when immediate diagnostic information is required to prevent severe harm or death.
And this raises a crucial point about the disconnect between how we perceive this urgency as the general public and how it actually plays out in a clinical setting.
Yeah, big difference.
Because my entire understanding of a stat order comes from watching medical dramas. If you watch ER or Grey's Anatomy, the word stat is an auditory weapon.
Oh, for sure.
It is delivered at maximum volume. A doctor is sprinting down a hallway alongside a gurney, pushing through double doors, screaming, "Push 10 cc's of epinephrine! Stat!" The drama relies entirely on the volume of the word.
Well, the television aesthetic requires that auditory cue. It instantly telegraphs to the audience sitting at home that the stakes have crossed into life or death territory.
But our sources explicitly investigate this phenomenon. They ask whether real-world medical workers run down the halls shouting, "Stat!" the way their television counterparts do. And the reality is a resounding no. Real hospitals don't operate like Hollywood soundstages.
Not at all. In a real-world clinical setting, you will almost never hear a professional screaming stat across a room.
Really?
No, the environment of a hospital requires calm efficiency.
Because shouting introduces panic into an environment that is already hovering on the edge of a crisis.
Yes, it increases the ambient noise level, which makes it harder for other clinicians to hear monitors or communicate effectively.
That makes a lot of sense.
Plus, it unnecessarily distresses patients in neighboring beds who hear screaming and assume the worst. And frankly, shouting verbal orders in a chaotic room is a fantastic way to cause a medical error.
So, what does this all mean for the actual execution of a stat order? If they aren't yelling it, how does the entire hospital know to pivot the MRI queue or immediately dispatch a critical medication? The silence feels almost anticlimactic compared to the TV drama.
Real medicine relies on the silent, incredibly efficient power of the written, or more accurately today, the digital word. A physician inputs a stat order into a patient's electronic health record on a tablet or a computer.
Ah, the open source code operating system in action.
Exactly. That digital order immediately routes through the hospital's network. It triggers a specific high-priority visual alert on the pharmacy's dispensing screen or a priority ping on the radiology department's monitor.
Wow.
The software system reorganizes the queue silently. The medication is drawn or the imaging table is cleared without a single word needing to be shouted down a corridor.
That completely reframes how we should view competence in a high-stakes environment. We are conditioned by entertainment to expect that chaos, running, and high volume equal urgency and importance. But in high-level medical care, quiet, structured, digital communication is the true marker of an urgent situation being handled effectively. The silence is the efficiency.
The digital infrastructure carries the panic so the human beings don't have to. the clinicians can remain calm because the three-tier system, scheduled, PRN, and stat, is doing all the heavy lifting of prioritization in the background.
As we wrap up this deep dive, it is amazing to look back at the journey of the single word. We started with a relatable office scenario, jokingly demanding a coffee or a Snickers bar to combat the afternoon slump, and we traced that instinct back to its roots.
We dispelled the myth of the acronym, too. It is not ASAP's medical cousin, despite our persistent habit of capitalizing it to make it look more urgent on the screen.
We found a direct abbreviation of the ancient Latin word statum, a word adopted during the rapid expansion of 19th century medicine, not to sound elite, but to serve as a vital neutral language, the original global operating system that prevented dangerous medical errors across international borders.
And we saw how that single Latin brick fits into the broader architecture of medical timekeeping, functioning as the ultimate override switch alongside the slow cooker baseline of scheduled orders and the reactive salt shaker of PRN, as needed care.
And finally, we shattered the Hollywood illusion. The true power of stat does not come from a dramatic hallway shout. Its power lies in the silent, highly structured digital command that can instantly mobilize an entire hospital's resources to save a life without even waking the patient in the next room.
It definitely adds a layer of historical gravitas to the next time someone uses it in a mundane Tuesday morning email thread.
It really does. It makes you realize how much invisible architecture supports the language we use every single day. So, before we go, I want to leave you with a thought to mull over on your own. We've just explored how a hyper-specific 19th century medical abbreviation leaked out of the hospital and into our everyday office slang. It makes you wonder, what other everyday urgent patch phrases do we casually shout at home or in the workplace that possess completely forgotten historical origins?
Oh, that's a good question.
Right. When we are frantically trying to get our kids out the door in the morning or rushing a project to a client, are we unknowingly invoking ancient military tactics? Are we using 17th century maritime law just to emphasize that we are running late? It is worth thinking about the ghosts hiding in our everyday vocabulary. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Now, if you'll excuse me, I really do need to go find that coffee statum.